Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good day. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are at this present moment in time. My name is Renee Musai. I'm the Senior Curator and Head of Curatorial and Collection at Autograph here in London. It is my pleasure to introduce today's talk, which forms part of the international season of Photo Life, presented in partnership with Photo Australia and Photo 2022, the forthcoming International Festival of Photography in Melbourne. Photo Life is supported by the British Council as part of the UK-Australia Season 21-22. It's a collaboration between the British Council and the Australian Government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Autograph's work here in the UK is supported by public funding from the Arts Council England. The idea behind this collaborative talks program is really to facilitate a creative, intellectual, artistic exchange between artists and curators based in the UK and in Australia. Hence, each of the talks in the program, there have been 8 so far. These are the last 2. One artist from one country is in conversation with a curator from the other country to explore through a mode of engaged and open dialogue ideas around image making in relation to matters of identity and diaspora, history, culture, memory, coloniality, decoloniality, post-coloniality, if you will, and different conditions of existence. And these conversations are framed in the context of human rights, representation, and social justice. And very much an effort to center and foreground, of course, brown, Black, Indigenous, feminist, queer, and other crucial and still often underrepresented voices in storytelling, photography, film, and lens-based media. The 5 British artists we selected all feature in our current group exhibition on display at Autograph, entitled Care, Contagion, Community, Self and Other. Othello is one of them. And if you do find yourself in London in the next few months, please do come and visit us. And there's time until mid-February. Today's talk will last about 45 minutes. Feel free to leave questions. You can use the chat function to do so. During the talk, it will be monitored. And if you are watching this live and would like to access captions, please click closed captions and then subtitles. This is unfortunately the last Photo Live UK-Australia talk as part of this webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us these last few weeks. And if you have missed any of the talks, you can find them both on Autograph's website as well as photo.org.au. For today's session, we are joined by Othello de Souza Hartley and Andy Butler. Othello de Souza Hartley is a visual artist. I will give you a little synopsis of his biography in a minute. And Andy Butler is also an artist and an educator and a curator, and currently the acting artistic director of West Space in Melbourne. So Othello de Souza Hartley is a visual artist working across multiple interdisciplinary platforms. He's also an educator, very generous with his students, as I've had the pleasure to witness over many years. Whose artistic vocabulary encompasses photography, moving image, film, video, sound, drawing, as well as painting and performance. His practice is deeply concerned with ideas around the human body as a site of embodiment, often engaging very intimately, courageously, and imaginatively with different modes of self-portraiture. And these self-portraits, as you will see in his presentation in the dialogue with Andy, are often staged in both private and public settings, from domestic interiors to vast industrial spaces, while addressing courageously questions around masculinity and vulnerability as visually performed and often contested ideas. I personally had the great pleasure and privilege recently over the last year to work closely with Othello on the development of his most recent series, Blind But I Can See, which was commissioned for Autograph's Care, Contagion, Community, Self and Other project. And Othello created a wonderful, soothing, evocative body of work, which reflects on the experience of solitude, stillness, loss, grief, and the desire to seek stillness and tranquility in a time of both personal and collective crisis. Othello has been a recipient of numerous public arts commissions over the years and has participated in a range of solo and group exhibitions. These include the Camden Arts Centre, the Photographers Gallery, Platform for the Arts, and the National Portrait Gallery in London, as well as the Museum of Liverpool, Shanghai Centre for Photography, Open Eye Gallery in Liverpool, Gasworks in London, to name but a few. And Andy Butler is a writer, curator, and artist. I think there's a lot of shared synergy across both of their respective practices. And Andy's work also focuses on the way societal structures of power shape cultural production, Like Othello, he works across different platforms: painting, film, photography, performance, installation. Andy, your writing on art and politics has been published widely internationally to critical acclaim, including in magazines such as Freeze or the Saturday paper. I was going to say the Sunday paper, but it's the Saturday paper. For instance, as well as there's a range of anthologies, museum catalogs, and artist monographs. As a curator and a cultural leader, Andy tackles complex questions around how mainstream cultural institutions engage with culturally diverse communities and underrepresented voices, routinely addressing matters of power, privilege, inclusion in relation to societal transformation and equity. He's currently, as mentioned earlier, acting artistic director at West Space, which is an artist-led contemporary arts organization in Melbourne. This is enough for me, I think, this morning. I will now hand over to both Andy and Othello. And again, thank you very much for being here and sharing your knowledge and insights with you. I'm very much looking forward to the talk.
Great. Oh, thank you so much for that generous introduction, Renee. I feel it makes me feel like I'm a real professional and a real artist, which is great. But I'm so thrilled to be in conversation with you, Othello. I feel like you have such an interesting practice that, you know, it exists and functions at such a distance from Australia, but there's so many resonances between the sort of questions you're unpacking. And I think some really global dialogues that are functioning within a lot of these diaspora communities, a lot of these sort of, a lot of the Black, Indigenous and people of color communities are really asking similar questions. I'd love to invite you to share your screen so that we can start, you know, talking about some of your projects.
Sure. Okay, let's share the screen. Okay. Share screen. 1 second. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Cool. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay.
If you just want to go to the slideshow function.
I'm going to start. Okay. Brilliant.
Perfect. I think it'll be really great to begin, Othello, with your most recent body of work, Blind But I Can See, in the Care Contagion Community exhibition. I just feel like it's really emblematic of so many of the complex issues you tackle in your practice. And yeah, it's just really timely in responding to a lot of the you know, COVID situation we've all been in. So yeah, it'd be great to hear more about that project.
Yeah, so I thought I would start off with this quote that a friend of mine came to see the exhibition, and we were having some dialogue about the work. And when I was talking to him about the work, because the main premise of the work is about simplicity, and obviously going through the time that we went through in the last year and a bit, and getting the commission and how I tackle the commission. So this quote came up, and it's the ultimate simplicity leads to purity. And not that I'm trying to lead to purity, but it's in a way something that's having in my mind, and you'll never achieve it, but hopefully you'll get there. It's, you know, you'll keep working towards it. And ultimate simplicity, it sort of sums up where I'm going with the work. And I've just put the title of the film, Gyro Dreams of Sushi. So Blind But I Can See. So one of the good things I would say is about being a creative person is that you can use your creativity in moments of grief to tackle subjects that may be bothering you. So my father passed away last year to COVID, and I was a bit lost because I wasn't expecting it. We had conversations about what we were going to do in the summer, and I think when he passed, I was a bit lost for a moment, and then the normal response to do is that you start posting it on social media and letting people know. But for me, knowing my father's and conversations with my father and knowing how private he was, and also myself as a private person apart from my practice, it didn't feel right. But I really wanted to find a way that I could honor him, but also understand the grief that I was going through. So my mum came to stay with me, and for when my father passed, and I went to the house a week later and started photographing his room. And that was just something that just came to me. I didn't know what was going to do the work, but I just wanted to somehow be in the presence of the things around him. And then 2 weeks later, I got an email from Autograph which started this for the commission. But I would say that when I was doing this project, I've been photographing my body and using my body and photographing for many years now. But dealing with grief and doing this project, everything became more difficult for me. It's like understanding the room. So when you see my other work and how I photograph my body and in other spaces, there's usually no hierarchy between the body and the space. And even understanding the light in the room became something. So I went over a process of started researching, watching lots of films. I've watched the film Moonlight, and there's a scene when the boy's in the bath, and I watched lots of films with beds, lots of paintings, and then kept going back to the room and revisiting the room, trying to understand what it is I was trying to create, speaking to friends. Renee was a great support in this, helping me through this whole process. And I shot it all on film. I did shoot some digital and some on Polaroid, but the main work was shot on film. And I think it wasn't until like the 6th roll and another conversation with Renee, and then I felt I had got there, and then we had a conversation, then I went back. But it's interesting that because I was dealing with grief, I was letting go of some of the things that I normally go through when I'm doing this kind of performance, sort of using my own body as self-portrait work. And that particular day, I got up and I started to did a meditation, got myself in the head, and then went into the room, and then everything sort of came together. I was in a different space, but I felt that from the morning before I actually got to the room. So in a way, this was my way of kind of dealing with the grief and sort of honoring my father. And then you will see in other bits in the work, I did a painting, I did a film, which I'm not going to show now, but the film's you'll see it in the next slide. There is a film as well. And during the lockdown, there was a tree there's a tree, I'm looking at it now actually, there's a tree outside my window. But there's that thing when you're busy, I appreciate the area I live in, but when you're running around, you just run around, you don't really see things. It's like you're so focused and your head's down. And during the lockdown, I was able to really observe the area that I live in, notice things that I don't really notice, going for cycles, walks, because it was quiet. You really sense of like sounds and environment. And this tree, because I was working online, I kept looking at this tree. And I'm looking at it now, even though it's been cut, that it became sort of like a meditative, tranquil thing for me, like a peace. And so then after doing the photographs, I used the film. I made the film. And again, I was thinking about how I do this film. So I'm looking at this tree through a window. So I first attempted it for like a reflection, with my own reflection. And then I started to think about the simplicity of it, is that I don't want my reflection to jar it. Even with the way I was filming it, I was thinking of a drone at first. But it's just going back to not thinking about fancy angles, but just come back to the simplicity and the meaning of the work. But also during that time period, things had to be simple because we couldn't be around people. We had social distancing, and getting trapped into fancy angles that would have looked nice above flying would have taken away from the piece. And then I went to my neighbour's, he got a balcony, I don't have one. And I filmed it from the balcony. And then the second stage was to record the sounds. And that was, again, listening to the sounds that I don't really listen to, because I'm still and I'm paying attention to them now, and everything is enhanced. And then reverse the sound. And then the last part of that was, when the film was edited, I was watching the film and I collected the leaves and twigs from the tree and painted watching the film. But then the connection for all this is my dad likes green. And about a year and a half or two before he died, he was talking about painting his office green, and he liked green. So there's a connection through the whole work. But each stage led to each stage. And I couldn't have done the painting without doing the photographs first, because they're all kind of connected in a way. But each one had to go for each stage, because the grief was dealt with in the photographs. And I wouldn't say it came to an end, but then after that, I was able to go into another phase. But it couldn't be anywhere, it had to be that way around.
Yeah, it's so interesting the way that that you describe how all of the different elements of this exhibition of these works came together, and sort of this idea that there's, you know, this grieving stage that you've gone through with the photographs, and sort of moving beyond that and trying to explore other elements through the painting and the video. But I was really taken with something that you said right at the beginning as you were discussing that first work, that you're a private person except in your practice, and that you're a very private person, but your practice is obviously deeply rooted in your personal experiences and just happens to feature your body a lot. And so I was just wondering, you know, what is it that draws you to sort of this mode of self-portraiture, even though you know, the way that you describe, you know, you being quite private?
I think I remember we spoke about I have an interest in performance, and when I was a teenager, I used to go to performing arts classes on the weekend, and I have this interest in performance, which I've always wanted to find a way to bring it into the photography. And then when I did the masculinity project, was the first way that I was able to bring it in. But it's not just the thing that people think that when I do use the body, I just turn up and I do that. It's before I do this, there's a whole process that I go through. It's like there are times when I'm trying to do it. If I get up in the morning and it doesn't feel right, I don't do it. So I always tell people who work with me, there could be a possibility that I might not do it on that day, because it's like I have to be in the right headspace. It's almost like I'm becoming like, I remember I did this film in 2018 called Noise, and I said to the person who worked with me on the film that I'm going to literally be in a week of meditation, and when I do turn up to actually do the film, I probably won't speak much, but don't take it personal, because I have to be in a certain headspace to do this work.
And what is that headspace? Is there a particular headspace for each work, or are you trying to find a particular sort of headspace that just allows you to be creative?
It's a headspace to be creative, but I guess it changes with each piece of work, because obviously if you're doing it in the public space, then that's another, you have to get yourself really comfortable in to be able to go into a public space and be naked and do that piece in a public space. Obviously when it was a private space, it's slightly different, but there is a sense of I have to be in a certain mindset, and that usually is a process. Like I said to you, sometimes it can take a week before the piece, and then I have to get up and I have to meditate. I have to do a bit of yoga to really make sure that I'm really staying in that state to do the work. If I'm not, like what was happening when I was doing the project in my dad's bedroom, is that because I was dealing with grief, and then grief comes with self-doubt about your work. I wasn't never at one point until the last two. I went through 7 rolls of film. I shot on a medium format, but because I was dealing with other stuff, it's not that I forgot, but because I've been doing it for a while, so I know the process to go through. But because I had these other things dealing with, it's kind of I kind of didn't think about that side. It didn't come to me. It didn't even dawn on me that I need to go back to how I was when I'm normally doing the project. I mean, that's because I was dealing with a lot of grief, looking after my mum, and then dealing with the grief, and then self-doubt kicking in as well.
Yeah, you described in doing that piece that you felt it was a process of letting go. Was it a sort of a process of letting go of headspace and just like sort of submitting yourself to the process? So yeah, what were you letting go of?
It was just actually the grief was trying to understand, and it was just that realization. I think we all know that death's going to come to us, but when it's a parent, it's really made me think about life in a different way. And it's like the reality. It's like, this is real. This is really going to happen to you. When it's removed from you and it's somebody else, yeah, you're upset, or it might be a good friend. But when it's actually really personal to you, it's completely different. Well, for me, it is. And there's that sense of reality. And then it's like I start thinking about my own life. It's like my dad was always a very positive person. He encouraged me a lot in my practice. And also I was thinking about how can I take my life forward from this point.
The way that you describe this project is it feels so personal and emotional and important for you at such a pivotal and devastating time for you in your life. But now that you've had sort of this distance from that moment where you staged this photography and took these photographs, and you've seen them in the exhibition space. Have you had sort of different reflections on the work now that you've had distance from it and you're not in that space of creating it?
No, what I'm interested in to hear what other people bring to the work now, because it's like I put the work out, and I don't understand why I did the work. But what has interested me now is to hear other people's stories and their engagement. I got this beautiful email from a woman last week, and how she saw her own grief in the work, and how that made her think about the trauma that she went through. She lost somebody. I think it was a daughter. Yeah. I don't want to say too much because it was quite a private thing. So she sent it to me. But in a way, it was like how she interpreted it through herself and her own grief. And I was interested in that story. So it's like I put the work out there, but it's really nice when people come, obviously they have their own narratives around it, or they can place us, or the conversations around the work.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, coming back to your initial to the initial quote that you were interested in thinking about, that ultimate simplicity leads to purity. It's so interesting that in this way of dealing with such an emotional and personal experience, you've stripped back so many elements to try and make it this really sort of, to become a story that can actually be universalized in a way that people can approach and project their own sort of histories and background onto. I just feel like with that, that triptych, that photographic triptych that you have is just so powerful in terms of the absence of the body in the middle there, and the really intimate spaces on either side of it. I was
going to actually read to you I'll read to you the last part, actually what you just said. I'll read you the last part of what she said to me in her email. Your work touches something universal beyond race, culture, etc. with your work.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point to think about, especially given that, that this talk series is framed around personal identity. And race, and yet you've had this sort of experience from someone that's really sort of spoken to and drawn out some ideas that they feel are much more universal. And I know that in other works that we've sort of discussed, that you feel like you may be interested in things like the body, or things sort of beyond this really personal identity form. Yeah, it'd be really great to chat more about this.
Yeah.
This
so form was like last year. Pitshanger came to me. They were based at a building in Ealing, an area called Ealing in London. It was built by the guy who the architect behind the Bank of England, and he built a smaller version of that in Ealing, based on that. And then inside the home is decorated with pieces from his travels around the world. And they approached me and said to me, they're going to have they want to have a piece of my work in there, because they were trying to, they were raising money to keep it going, because lockdown it was shut. And when they started to do a lot of education work for young people in the area, that just straight away I thought, yep, I'd get involved. And then they said to me, you could do one piece of your work, because they like the work that I do around, and I was thinking about bodies, and I was thinking about dancers. So both of them are dancers. And then they had another piece where they wanted me to incorporate an Nish Kapoor piece. And known as a sculptor, that also, in my mind, I started to think of a sculptural piece. And I did one piece with his work, and then my own piece, which I created this one. And again, I was thinking about sculpture, body, form, and created this piece, and found dancers to work with it. Originally, I wanted an elder woman dancer, a retired female, but it didn't work out. And then these two came together. I put a call out, and they got these dancers, and we sort of choreographed it in the morning time, and came up with this piece.
Yeah, beautiful. I have seen the other photo with the little Anish Kapoor work, and the way that you've integrated into it is so subtle, but so sort of beautiful, and it's such a light touch, but it's a really powerful image. I'd love to hear more about what draws you to the body. And I know that you've hinted towards your interest in contemporary dance, but I'd love to hear more about, this relationship between the body, dance, and performance, and how you try to bring it together in your work?
I think I've always had this interest in dance. I think it started from when I was like 7 years old. I always told a story that I wanted to do ballet, but I was never brave enough to ask my father. And I spent a lot of time going to contemporary dance. Like apart from during the lockdown, obviously, but I would go I go to like contemporary dance a couple of times a month if I can to see something. But I just like the way bodies move. Even like gymnasts, I like a lot of gymnasts. There's a French dance company that I go to see quite a lot. I forgot the name of the company now, and the way how bodies move and intertwine, and the bodies are like sculptural pieces in itself. Yeah, I think it started from like 7. It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I can't really place it, but it's just something that I find fascinated by bodies.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like in the sort of previous series that you were talking about, the blind but I can't see works, even in that abstract painting piece and in the video piece that unfortunately you weren't able to show, but when I saw it, it's so beautiful and so still and so meditative that even in these works that you produce that don't have a body in them, you can still really feel the presence of somebody.
And that's what I want.
Yeah.
Sense of like symbolisms or just presence. There has to be that in the work. And I think with this piece, it's like leading up to, I think what I've been doing up to now has been leading up to a piece that I really want to work on, which is going to be the next one, which is working with loads of dancers. It's every time I do it, I'm still trying to understand the body. Each piece I do, and where can I take it?
And sort of, what does your collaborative? Sorry, just one last thing on the dances that I really want to draw out is what does the sort of collaborative process of finding these sorts of final postures and forms look like? Are you sort of in discussion with the dancers and giving them?
Yeah, so this was almost like being a choreographer, because when I got in there in the morning, I obviously I spoke to them during the week. I explained to them what I wanted. But it's also, when you work with people, it's also allow them to, because they're professional dancers. And it's finding people who are also passionate about what they do. And obviously they're going to bring something. So when I explained to them what I wanted, we spent the morning, the first half, trying out different positions, trying out the light, seeing where it worked, where's the best position. I always do a recce of spaces before anybody, before even the shoot day. So I spend time in the space trying to figure out where I'd like to create the piece, the lighting in the space. But before we did this, we went through a process of trying out different positions, them trying to understand me allowing them, because they are dancers, to try things out. And they were interpreting what I wanted. And then we kept trying things out, and then I would move. One of the things I always do, because like, particularly when you're working with women, I always say to them, when they come to me, is like, they're always quite conscious about, particularly a male, how their body's been represented. And I always say that, no, I'm really conscious about that. So in the way the works, like everything we was doing, like maybe slightly moving the hand up. So it's more about the body, but we're not thinking about other things and sexualizing the body, because that's not what I'm trying to do. So I always talk about that because there's always those questions particularly with women who get involved in the work. So I'm constantly thinking about those things and how everything is placed in a particular way.
Yeah, beautiful. And I know that we are about to go to some more self-portraiture work with you, but I just love the way that your practice is this method of collaboration with participants, that there seems to be such an interesting sort of relationship building that you have with your subjects. And it just seems like you've found, this format that really just helps you sort of collaborate and work with other people in really interesting ways. But yeah, it'd be great to sort of move on to the next series that you have in mind.
So like, just like the Blind But I Can't See project, Own Narrative was a similar way of dealing with personal stuff. So personal identity is that I really like Japanese style clothing. And I would say clothing that could be seen as unisex. So for a long time, even before I had that, I've always had questions about sexuality, about gender, like sexuality, gender. And it's been going for a long time that people have always questioned me when they meet me. It's like, are you gay? And it's something that comes up a lot. My sister was telling me about a conversation about somebody she'd met recently who was asking, is your brother gay? And it's really weird because I don't have children. And it's these boxes that people put you into because you're a certain, and I'm not. I'm a heterosexual male. But does that even matter? But it's these boxes that just people want to put you in because you're a certain type of person or the way you present yourself without actually trying to get to know you. So in 2018, it was a point when I think it happened again, and the conversation, I'm so over it. So I just went the opposite way and did a performance which was so out there that maybe even to get people themselves to question, the questions that I was getting. So I did this performance piece to a Polaroid camera, and then I thought of where I can take this further because it was Polaroid pieces. But then I went to a builder's yard and got the scaffolding piece from a builder's yard, which is a very masculine environment, and got the Polaroids placed into this, what essentially is a place when they're doing like scaffolding, which is, it's predominantly male, and placed the Polaroids in there. But this was also a performance of me just saying, I'm happy the person that I am, and also controlling my own narrative. And this is another way of dealing with issues again.
Yeah, it was great at the beginning how Renee introduced your practice just being this really sustained engagement with questions of masculinity and vulnerability. And I think that really has really come through in the several projects you've chatted to us about today. And I just feel like, yeah, this is such a sort of interesting sort of coming together of sculptural forms and performance and photography. I know that you have an image of this installed in an unusual space.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So after I finished this piece, a curator in Italy saw it and said, would you like to exhibit it for Rome Art Week? And it was really interesting. Like, there's a thing that I've realized that sometimes that artists sometimes want to cross the boundaries of curator. But now I'm really interested in letting go and seeing how the curator would place the work, because I would never have thought of putting it into a male change. This is a football stadium. So during Rome Week, she thought the work is about, it's sort of hinting towards masculinity, but it's not part of the masculinity project. But would it be interested in putting it into a male changing room? So there's a sound piece that I made with a composer called Ian Dean, because I came up with the words after years of working in the masculinity project. I took the words and made a sound piece with a composer, and we played it in this space. And then there was one other picture from the next series I'm going to show behind us in the showers, but just placed it in there, and she came up with this idea, and it was great. Alexandra, perfect. But it was just that this piece of work, placing it into a football stadium, but also the changing rooms and the conversations around that, which is quite a very masculine place. It's, and I love that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had no idea that it wasn't your choice to put it in this space, because for me, coming to this with my curator brain, it's such a natural fit to really draw out those tensions around ideas of masculinity and vulnerability in this sort of heterosexual space. And I just think it's such a playful way to really bring that in. But I know that you were going to talk as well about Catalogue of Emotions and sort of your painting work and
I'll just quickly go into this one, because this was the first time, like, I've noticed being as a visual artist, there's always this painting, this sculpture, but photography always sometimes, like, I've been in talks that people have sort of said, photography still don't see it as an art form, and there's this questions about photography quite a lot, and it's sort of sometimes seen as a lesser medium. But last year, during the lockdown, well, just in between one of the lockdowns, someone offered me to have a show, and it was the first show that I was able to put paintings and photography. And I was going to show the film here, but we couldn't get the projector installed in time. Where the photography and the paintings were side by side. They weren't just like, one side photography. They were interdispersed between each other. But it just showed that there was no hierarchy between the two, and also the conversations that the photography was having with the painting. Because sometimes I'm painting and I'm looking at the photographs, but there was this, like I said, there was no hierarchy. But it was great to see that how both of them sit side by side on an equal platform.
And sort of, as a viewer who didn't have the pleasure of seeing this exhibition in the flesh, sort of what were the conversations that you felt were drawn out as the artist between the
That was
paintings
it.
and the photographs?
That was the conversation. People were like, photography is like, you've really highlighted photography's place. It's like we don't have to have this separation all the time. When you see galleries doing a lot now, but this separation between the mediums. This is photography has its place. But it was interesting that people were saying that I feel like they're both talking to each other, and people were picking that up. That there was like, they felt there's a conversation going on between the works. And there were some word pieces in there, because I also work with words. So there was a couple of word pieces in there. But it was that dialogue that was going on.
It's interesting that in your painting practice, you seem consistently drawn to abstraction. And just would love to sort of understand why, because I assume that, you're probably interested in similar things across your painting and your photography, but what's behind the choice to sort of exist in this
right.
sort
So
of
with the photography, I remember when I was doing my MA, everybody kept saying to me, let go a bit. And when I'm doing my photography, it's quite controlled. The projects are never like, I just pick up a camera. I'm not a street photographer. I'm documentary, so I don't pick up my camera and go out on the street. Everything I do is always pre-planned. Like I'm working on a project now, and I've had the idea for like 2 years, and then we had lockdown in between. So I've been working up to this project, and now I'm about to start approaching organizations and applying for funding. But it's 2 years of like thinking about it, doing research. I'm still researching the project. So everything's it's a whole process that I go through when I'm doing the photography project. Where the paintings are the other side of me, it's almost like when I call it catalog of emotions, because it is like my emotions. It's me, it's how I feel at the time. So the work kind of relates to how I'm feeling. So that if you saw the work that I did pre-lockdown and the work I did post-lockdown, the work post-lockdown is a lot more calmer. Where there was a bit of madness in the work before lockdown. And that's why I call it, and I always call them studies because it's a continual study. I never call them, I don't have the name, I don't give them a name. I just call them study 1, study 2, and it will just continue that way. And it's my release. It's letting go.
Sorry,
I'm not controlling the paintings.
I just like, in what you were saying before, I feel like in my brain, I nearly sort of mixed around the ways that you were talking about pre-lockdown and post-lockdown, because you said that post-lockdown was calmer for you than pre-lockdown.
Sorry,
really?
Post-lockdown. Yeah, post-lockdown. The pre-lockdown was, it was just running around like everybody else. You got to go to this open. You got to do this. You got to do. It's like you're just constantly on this treadmill, but you're not stopping to really enjoy anything. I remember one time I was with a friend and we were walking around in central London and we went to see exhibitions. It was a beautiful summer day. And our intention was, we were like going from one gallery to the other. But we were really enjoying ourselves. We just like, we were just in the gallery, looking at the work, moving to the next gallery. Because I do this now and again with different friends. We have called a gallery day. But then there's at some point I realized that I'm actually enjoying this because we're just so focused on just getting from one gallery to the gallery. I just said, let's stop. And I said, look at this day. And we just said, stop for a moment. And we looked up and there was this beautiful blue sky. And it was that moment you're thinking, we're not actually really enjoying ourselves. And then we just said, stop, let's go and get something to eat and then we'll carry on. And we don't have to get around to every single gallery within a time scale. But it's moments like that. And then what's happened during the lockdown and just before that, it's almost like my mind has gone back to a childlike thinking. It's a more playful approach to the work. So one, there's more stillness, but there's a childness there. I'm having fun. It's like I'm playing. I go into the studio and I'm having fun. It's not this, I'm an artist. We've got to be, no, a lot of those things have changed.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting to hear because I feel like from the other side of the world in Australia, where in Melbourne, we're still in lockdown. But that's just the same. I feel like that's such a similar conversation. And I feel like it'd be really interesting to see how that continues to shape artistic practices, because I feel like even the first work that you talked about in this talk, The Blind That I Can't See, it's so still and so calming. And it'll be so interesting to see how that plays out in the future for you. I'd love to hear more about this.
I'm going to just run through this one really quickly, and then we'll get into you want to talk about the masculinity project. I just run this project. It's called I Am, and these are conversations again about gender, race, the relationship between Black women and their hair, history, body type, body shape, and this is the sort of one of the things I do. This is like a hint into what I do before I do the project. So I was testing that location because I have an interest in British architecture. So as well as there's the research, you know, there's an artistic thing that I like in my work, which is the visual side of the work. So I like these sort of locations because I have a like huge interest in like interiors and architecture. So I follow a lot of architecture sites. So I'm constantly, every day, I'm checking architecture sites, looking at architecture, and particularly abandoned spaces and British architecture. So I was going to do this project about particularly women, because this is after the masculinity project. And this was around 2017, somewhere around there. Anyway, and I went out and tested locations, and this was outside. And then I started to feel that, because I always do this testing first, and I felt that it wouldn't be good to have women outside and invite them to be naked outside, because I have to think about them. It's like, this is a public space. So I tested it for myself, but then I wouldn't want to rush the project. So I went around looking for locations, and I put a call out, and I just got interviewed loads of women about how they feel of themselves as a Black woman today. Questions around their hair, body shapes, relationship with their parents. Like one woman said that she cut off her hair and her mum cried, because that automatically, that's that thing of releasing that thing, that hair that says feminine, and to go against that, which is like, no, I'm not going to be controlled by my hair. And then talking about how her mum was crying when she came home with shaved hair, body shapes, and also when I'm working, it's like thinking about the space, but also how I respect the women, because this is not about sexuality. Like I had a female, an assistant, and really thinking about, again, it's a collaboration between me and the women. So I said to them, I want you to get into a position that you feel comfortable with. And then we had conversations, and you could see, and then I placed this bed of Afro hair, or just synthetic Afro hair. And then there was loads of stories about Afro hair. There was something in Pretoria in South Africa when Black girls were sent home for having natural hair. I worked with a fashion designer called Lamina Nasuna, who also incorporated hair into clothing. So loads of discussions and things that's been happening for years with female friends, families who talk about women, talking about colorization, about Black skin and fair skin, and loads of these things which culminated again into this project. So it's again dealing with loads of things and conversations over many years that brought this project to life.
Yeah, I wonder if you could sort of maybe even with this image or these images, give us more of an insight into how those sort of conversations dictated the sort of outcome that you landed on. Because yeah, you talk about all of this sort of research that goes into it, and I'd love to hear more about how it shapes.
Well, the work comes from like obviously research, but it's not like I'm doing. It's just being aware. So that if I hear things and I'm not sure what I'm going to do it, but somehow my brain notes these things, and then conversations with my grandmother who was mixed race. She was mixed, and her questions around dark skin and fair skin, female friends talking about like their hair and how people like touching their hair, and the relationship with Black women and their hair, the relationship towards darker skinned Black women as opposed to say like a fairer skin, and how they feel as a darker skinned person, the relationship with dark skin and say other cultures around the world, how dark skin is sometimes is not seen as beautiful. And only now that we're seeing a change and you're seeing diversity, you look at fashion now and it's changing, where you're seeing diverse models, and the effect that all these things have had on all these women. Even body shapes, you know, like thinking like, whereas some cultures would say like, if you're a very slim woman, you know, that's kind of regarding Western culture. But then in certain cultures, that some women would, there's a stereotype about body shape, so you don't fit into that mold. And it's like, again, no, that's a question. And that's what I mentioned about the skin, it's about your hair. These are conversations I've been having with women for a long time. And I wanted to bring it out in this work.
Yeah, great. And how did the participants sort of respond to the outcome?
The participants was great. And I'll say one thing, is that this particular person, she wrote on her Instagram when she posted it, she said, would you believe it's a male photographer who took these images? Because they all said to me they felt completely respected. They understood the project. They came, I put a call out, and I got all of them within 7 women within about space of about 15 minutes.
Mm.
And I explained to them how I was going to photograph it, but it was just that, again, trying to understand them, what they want to say about themselves through the image in a very subtle way again, but also making it really powerful. But at the same time, not, because a lot of times Black men's bodies are sexualized, and I'm very aware of that. So I'm not trying to sexualize the body. And the women completely understood that, and they wanted to talk. They wanted to do this project. I didn't force nobody to do the project, and the positions they took, it was them getting into a position that they felt comfortable.
Yeah, it's so amazing to get an insight into that sort of relationship building behind these projects. I am really aware of the time, Othello, and great.
Just quickly, right? I know you wanted to touch on this project. Well, Masculinity Project was the longest project I did. It started in 2010. I would never say a project end because you never know, an idea might come up. But I started in 2010. It started off with me photographing men and getting men to come to a studio. I wanted men to go fully nude at first, but I just really couldn't get any man to go beyond the chest. And even that started conversation about body shapes, men talking about I have to go to the gym first. Men talked about aging. I mean, the guy on the right and the left-hand side, the white guy with the glasses, who twice said to me when he called me, said he wants to be involved in the project, who mentioned the word, I'm old, then coming to the studio and then repeating, do you know I'm old? And it's the relationship between the men and their bodies. Men become really shy when they come in there. And it's loads of different men. I've photographed about 14 different men. But it's these conversations that come out that you wouldn't expect. You know, one guy saying that he feels invisible. One guy who was going to take part, then when I got home, he sent me an email saying he's a phony, because when he looks in the mirror, he sees a young man. He sees an old man and doesn't recognize himself. And he suffers with I was loads. There's so many stories came out. I had loads of men coming with their different stories. So it's a way of conceptualizing these stories. And then I turned the camera on myself. This is the first time I put myself in front of the camera, and then trying to understand myself at first. So like the barbershop, my relationship barbershop, I find in barbershops, I don't like barbershops. And it is part of a community, particularly you go to a Black barbershop, there is a community, and there's like talks about football, and there's all sorts of conversations going on. Sometimes there's a hypersexuality, and I'm not into football, to be honest with you. And I always felt that I didn't feel comfortable in that space. So this was one of the first ones I did, me in a space that I don't really feel comfortable in. Because then it's like a performance when I'm in these spaces, because then I become this person talking about things that I would normally talk about. And you get this out-of-body experience. So I always cut my own hair now, so I've done it for years. But and then even trying to find a space, I couldn't get a space, because every time I mentioned I was going to go to a space, the men in their heads interpreted that I was going to have a woman going naked in the space, and they were up for it. And then when I said it was me, it was like, give me a call next week. And then someone put me in touch with a guy. You believe it? And then in the end, someone put me in touch with an artist called Faisal Abdul, and he had at the time he had his studio below the barbershop, and obviously he's an artist, so he had a different understanding. So I went to meet him, and he gave me the space, and then from there the project continued. And I did this was in Shanghai, when it was exhibited in Shanghai, and I could talk about it another time, about how, again, letting the curator have control sometimes brings something to your work, because they did it like paintings, and they researched my work and said that you talk about your influences, like Caravaggio, and they did the research, and they looked like paintings. And then they could went into places like car garages, and then I did a lot of it in London, in another space in London, in another one, this is based on the research with the Samaritans about the men when they go through trauma and stuff. They do it behind closed doors. And there's the highest rate of suicide is between men between ages of 25 and 55, the growing rate of suicide. And silence, it's called silent suffering. And when I read the research, I created this picture. And then London's quite multicultural. It is very multicultural. I started to think of places that I wouldn't feel so comfortable in. So I went to the north of England, I went to the northeast, not as multicultural, and started interviewing white working class men about their masculinity, and spent a year going up and down So this is a steelworks in the northeast of England. But again, before I took these pictures, I spent a year traveling up and down interviewing working class men in the northeast before I did the pictures, because I really wanted to get understanding how they felt. And there's a lot of divide between the north and the south in England, because they feel like the south gets everything and the north is kind of neglected, and it had this industrial past. And I wanted to understand them. And then I did the picture, and then this film, I won't show the film, we ran out of time. I did a film that I come, and I think then I went to a coal mine, and did it in a coal mine, these industrial places, and then another picture when these men were talking about how proud they were as working class men going down the lift shaft into going down to work. And these are like the history and families of who want to work with their hands, and now being forced into these service industries, and these communities are breaking up. And I really want to understand it. So that's how. And then I think this is the last one I did in the series. I always wanted to, because there's a stereotype that men who work in the city, and if you look at the research I was doing with the Samaritans, who did stuff about mind, it's mental health, they talk about the gold standard. And this is because we live in a very materialistic world. It's like to be able, as you grow older as a man, you're going to have all these materialistic, you're going to earn a lot of money. And then we kind of have this perception of men who work in the sort of financial industry that they've got it sorted, they have everything. And then when I was doing one of my exhibitions, I was on the group show. This guy who kept coming in and out of the exhibition, and I noticed him. 2 days later, he called me and said to me, because I always wanted to do it on a trade floor, but I never had access because private banks are really private, and they don't allow anything like this on their floors. And the guy kept walking in, and he called me a couple of days later, and said, "Can we meet?" So we met in an area called Chelsea in London. And he come from a working class background, but through education and stuff, he got to work in the city. And then he confessed to me how much mental health there is in the city, and even the mental health he went through, working in the city and becoming this alpha male. And then you look in the mirror and you don't realize the person that you've become, because it's a very male industry, this city. And and he went to the bank and said to them, we really got to address these issues of mental health and this stereotype that once you've got money and you're a male, your life is sorted. And obviously they didn't allow me to show any logos or anything in the bank, but they allowed me access onto the trade floor, and I created this picture on the trade floor.
Yeah, it's amazing that you were able to get in there to take this photo, because I just feel like it's such a powerful image, and such a powerful image, I think, to end this discussion on, because I feel like I just was really taken by these longer term research projects that are really based off relationship building. I just feel like the way that you discuss that, really trying to understand the white working class or sort of these people from different experiences through these projects is really admirable. And I think the outcomes that you've talked about have been so interesting and multifaceted, and it's been such a pleasure to have this introduction to your practice. And I hope that all of the attendees that have tuned in, and those that will see this afterwards, are equally as excited and intrigued as I am by the talk we've had today. So thank you so much for your time, Othello.
Thank you.
It's been really, really fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
Your practice. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.